So I'm Ayush. I am a researcher at the Stanford AI lab. I currently work with Chelsea Finn, but this work was done previously when I was working with Professor Noah Goodman and some other folks. This talk is going to be significantly a lot more researchy as compared to the other talks that have happened here. I know this is an agents conference, but I think this work is still interesting because we want to sort of get to know what goes into building a good agent, and then after that, you can think about how you might go about getting it into a product. So this work concretely tries to answer the question of what data is needed in a base model in order to get it to be a reasoning model, and thereby an agent. So before I get into any sort of technical jargon and everything, I'm going to let you try to solve this problem. The task is to combine 2, 5, 6, and 8 using arithmetic operations to get to 24. And while you do this, I want you to try to observe how you think and how you're actually going about solving this problem. I'll give you the solution in a bit, so don't worry if you're unable to get to a solution. But maybe I'll give you 20 seconds or something to try to solve this problem. Cool, I think that was good enough time. Before I give you like the actual solution in the slide after this, one might think, okay, how if I pose this problem to a language model, how might it go about solving this task? So this was posed to Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And we can see that the stuff in blue, it kind of does something that is fairly reasonable, which is getting to 48, which is a multiple of 24, which it might be a good place to go from. But later on in its computation, the stuff highlighted in red, we can see that it just comes up with something that's completely wrong. 48 divided by 10 is not 24, but it claims that that is the result. So this task is representative of reasoning, or especially human reasoning, because it encapsulates two very important facts about how humans reason, which is exists this property called the snowballing of errors, and then correspondingly, there is this problem of look ahead. So for example, in the task that I gave you earlier, if you make the move of going 6 times 8 equals 48, as Claude did, you're more likely then not going to end up at a wrong solution. But if you make the sort of correct move of recognizing the fact that 6 times 5 is 30, you're going to go to 24 a lot easier. So how would a human actually go about solving a problem like this? So this is work from another group of people in Noah's lab, where they transcribed human think out loud transcriptions solving the game of countdown. And we can see stuff highlighted in blue. So humans are able to do math, but they're also able to do these sort of metacognitive verifying steps. So as we can see here, this human here sort of tries something, realizes it's not going to work, goes back and goes on and go forth until they get to the result, which is 6 times 5 minus 8 plus 2, which is 24. So this suggests that we can teach our language models these metacognitive or these sort of reasoning tricks in text rather than doing it in weights. And this is exactly what reasoning language models have learned. They have learned to solve these, they have learned these abilities somehow, and I guess the point is trying to reverse engineer how they got there. So here is O1 on the same problem. Apart from being good at math and being sort of good in general, it tries out a whole bunch of strategies which are not just arithmetic strategies, but also metacognitive strategies. So you can see here, it recognizes when a chain of reasoning is ending up at a place that is too high, and then it'll backtrack and go again. And then it tries a whole bunch of other things until finally it gets to a valid solution. So here is the task in all of its glory. This is what's called the game of countdown. The way this game is set up is you have a target number, a number between 10 and 100, and then the model is given 4 inputs, each between 1 and the target number. And the task is to combine these inputs using basic arithmetic operations. And like I already mentioned, the reason this is good is because there is a high branching factor. There are variable goal states you can sort of set up. You can sample a random number, sample a bunch of inputs, and you can get reasonable reasoning ability. And you're not sort of bound by the ability of the model itself. Almost all base models are able to do arithmetic, so you're not sort of bound by some math fact that the model might not know. And which is why this task is somewhat reasonable and used in academic reasoning papers. Here's a nice meme that sort of dates this paper, I guess, but this was a few months ago. We have the O1 models that somehow learned to backtrack and search. So did the R1 models through online RL, but the meta models sort of just fell flat and didn't really go anywhere. But yeah, this sort of sets up where I want to go with this talk, which is comparing Quen and LLaMA on the game of Countdown when trained using online RL. So the first set of results are the plot on the left. You see that on the x-axis is RL steps. So this is trained on using online RL on the game of Countdown. And the line in purple is the result when using Quen. And as we can see, it sort of saturates around the 60% rate. But when comparing to the blue line, which is the LLaMA model, it saturates at a much lower 35%. And we can see correspondingly in the response length plot that the LLaMA model seems to not want to use its context particularly cleverly. It tries to just want to go to the answer, as compared to the Quen model, which not only tries a whole bunch of operations, but also has these metacognitive abilities that I sort of hinted at earlier. So the question is, what enables model to learn how to self-improve or use their test time compute budgets efficiently? Is this something that spontaneously emerged, or do we need to do something to the base policy in order to get this to happen? We know that, we know intuitively, like the way humans reason, we need to explore the right set of ideas in order to get to solutions. And the question here is that what properties are needed for a given data distribution for a base model to start showing improvement when trained with online reinforcement learning? So here's the way we are going to try to answer this question. We set up what are called these 4 cognitive behaviors. The 4 behaviors we're interested in are answer verification, so saying something like, let me check my answer, backtracking, so sort of giving up on a chain of computation and then backtracking back to an earlier state, subgoal setting. This is what the Claude model did back a few slides, where you try to get to an intermediate computation that you know is going to be helpful. And then finally, backward chaining. So something like, I know I want to get to 24. Can I get back to my input sequence numbers given the target number? So we set up probes for these, and we used these probes on both the Quen and LLaMA model as they gave out checkpoints through the course of RL training. And we see something fairly interesting. We see that Quen models have a propensity to show both verification and backtracking, and basically nothing else. But interestingly, the LLaMA model basically did nothing. It just tried to go directly to answer and didn't really want to try to do too much. So taking this a step further, can we say anything about the expressivity of these cognitive behaviors in the base policy itself? And as you can see in the slide here, both LLaMA 3B base and the LLaMA 70B base significantly underperform on these cognitive behaviors that we have set up, as compared to a smaller Quen 3B LLaMA model, Quen 3B model. And this suggests 2 things, that having these behaviors in the base policy matter, and we have to get them into the base policy somehow. And the second thing is scale somewhat seems to help if you compare the LLaMA 3 versus LLaMA 70B model. So here's the meat of the talk, I guess. We're going to try to answer sort of three conditions. So we want to first find out that is it just the behaviors that lead to improvement and not just increased compute time or seeing the correct solutions. So let's dig into the first. So what we did was we generated SFT data from Claude 3.6 Sonnet on 1,000 countdown problems and 200 problems validation. We forced it to represent all of its operations in language. And because Claude seemed to be reasonable in instruction following, it was somewhat reliable. We have plots for arguing for the reliability in the paper, so you can check it out if you're interested. And we generated 5 data sets. So the 5 data sets are with all behaviors, just backtracking verification, backtracking and subgoal setting, and backtracking and backward chaining. And we did SFT on these 5 data sets for 5 epochs. Here's the results. Once you do SFT, we see both Quen and LLaMA show improvements. Here, we're seeing improvements both, and we're seeing saturation at around 80%, which suggests that it is these behaviors that were lacking in the base policy for online RL to go and sort of start solving the problem. And you can see that there are improvements. So it is not just the SFT data itself that is bringing these wins. Now, comparing to the behaviors, we see that now we can compare how these behaviors sort of track through time. And we can see that on all sorts of conditions, as long as backtracking is present in the initial policy through SFT or somehow, you're seeing improvements. So both for the LLaMA model and the Quen model, as long as the SFT data contains backtracking, you're good to go, you're going to see improvements. And finally, like the reason why we started this was to see how these behaviors change through the course of RL training. And we see something somewhat interesting here. We see that verifications are kept along as the base policy has been explicitly SFT'd on data that contains verification data. Backtracking seems to be something that is very important for this data distribution. So as long as the base policy has the ability to backtrack, RL seems to really want to keep it around. And as you can see, the only line at the bottom is the LLaMA model, which somehow never learned to backtrack. And these two results are for the other two cognitive behaviors, subgoal setting and backward chaining. You can see that they're only kept around when the model has nothing else it can do. So the only conditions where RL likes to keep these two behaviors around are when you're SFTing only with backtracking and subgoal setting and backtracking with backward chaining. So this suggests there probably exists some taxonomy of behaviors, and as a corollary, there exists some data primitives that you need in your data in order to get online RL to work. So next, we're going to sort of do the academic thing, which is to try to battle out against a bunch of reviewers and questions that reviewers might ask. So the first question a reviewer might ask is that it is the additional passes through the language model that is giving me the wins, and we try to argue against that by creating these compute-matched setups where we set up two conditions, one with an empty cart and one with a length-matched empty cart. So the number of passes through the language model is the same, but the amount of information in the chain of thought is nothing. There is no meaningful information either about arithmetic or the game of countdown in the chain of thought. And you can see that almost everything, all the lines that you see around the blue line, the light blue line for the LLaMA, which represents the LLaMA model's performance. So we can argue that it's not just the passes through the language model that matter, it's what you put in the chain of thought itself. Finally, one might argue that, oh, I'm SFTing on countdown as a result. Maybe the model learned something about countdown itself, and we wanted to argue against that. So what we did was we created another SFT data set where we filtered for correctness. So what we did was we created an SFT data which has basically no correct answers on the game of countdown, and we SFT'd on that data, and we basically get this green line, which matches the dark blue line. And you can see that even in this condition, you're seeing improvement, and you're seeing basically the same results as we saw earlier. So what did Quen do so differently? Can we use these insights that I've presented in SFT land to generate a pre-training data set or try to reverse engineer what the Alibaba team did with Quen in order to get like a more capable base policy? So that's what we're going to try to do next. So we used Quen 32B to rewrite documents into question, thought, answer pairs. The data that we used was data from math data sets. So specifically, we used Open Web Math and Fine Math. And we created two conditions. So the two conditions we created were a behavior amplified condition and a behavior minimized condition, each with about 8 million tokens. And then we SFT on this data. So we SFT about 2 epochs, which I guess is kind of non-standard, but I guess the results still hold. And here's the results that we see. The result that I want you to particularly pay attention to are the two lines that seem to be between the light blue and the purple. You can see that in the behavior minimized SFT data, the model doesn't meaningfully do any better as compared to when it is SFT'd on this curated pre-training set, which somehow now manages to match the Quen performance. And we can see that when we ran our behavioral probes on this curated pre-training SFT LLaMA model, we see that it demonstrates both verification and backtracking, similar to what Quen was doing when we ran our behavioral probes on Quen. Finally, we wondered whether we would see contextual activation. So what this means is one might argue that, oh, I've SFT'd on these cognitive behaviors, and I've done something to my data to make them more rich with these behaviors. How generalized are these behaviors going to be when they show up in a whole bunch of evals or a whole bunch of different tasks? So here, we evaluated the two models that we continually pre-trained, so the LLaMA plus curated pre-training and LLaMA plus behavior minimized control, on a data set, on an evaluation set called GPQA, which is a science data set. So this is fairly different from math. This requires a whole bunch of science. And while we didn't see any accuracy improvements, we did see contextual activation. So as you can see here, verification and backtracking showed up quite a bit, and surprisingly, subgoal setting is something that seemed to show up quite a bit when evaluating on this GPQA data set. Cool, so in summary, we identify cognitive behaviors that are necessary for self-improving reasoners. We show that search-like behaviors are necessary for a model to learn how to improve. We show through controls that the behaviors are important, not length or correctness of the chain of thought. And finally, we show that this is not just a quirk of SFT. You can create more generalized data. You can curate data to have these properties that can get you better improvement when you train with online RL. So finally, open questions. So this work set up another line of investigation, which is how do you get diverse exploration of different thoughts? Because I don't particularly buy the idea that the base model just does not have the ability to surface these cognitive behaviors. It probably is just a function of sampling or something like this that are preventing the model from showing these cognitive behaviors. So the questions are, can we get these models to discover these behaviors themselves? Or can we do something about the way we're doing RL that prevents this sharpening of distribution and amplifying of behaviors, rather than sort of exploring and being a bit more elicitation focused? Like this isn't just, the problem of discovery isn't just local to cognitive behaviors. This is something that humans have done. For example, humans invented a wheel to go from place A to place B. And in the limit, we want AGI to be able to discover its own tools. So that is why I think this is a fairly sort of important question to think about, and outside of the context of just these tricks that we have when we think about math reasoning or arithmetic tasks. Thanks for attention and questions. Mm-hmm.
Testing. Yeah, thanks for the talk. So just thinking backwards from like the companies putting agents into production, can we only unlock this uplift in performance through fine-tuning models?
How else would you go about getting, like through prompt tuning?
Yeah, maybe like prompt or a few shot, one shot learning or something along those lines. Or
yeah.
do you have to fine tune a model to generate this output?
I don't think so. I think that I think this is the idea of elicitation, right? Like as long as you're able to elicit these behaviors somehow, so like for some data distribution that you care about, if you're able to elicit the behaviors that you think are necessary to solve the given task, I think it's fine. Like I think we had an instantiation where we tried something similar using just prompting. Our models were a bit too small and they were not instruction tuned. But in a industry setting, I would imagine you can use an instruction tuned model, and you will be able to just get what you want through elicitation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, cool.
Hi. How did you create those data sets, and how sensitive are the results to like the amount of data and the quality of data in those data sets?
So we just used Claude. We just prompted Claude to generate data. We didn't do, we did some robustness, but we are resource bound, so we can't do like a whole bunch of quality testing. I think there is a result here that sort of argues around the quality of data mattering. So if you look at the line right under the purple line, That is when we do the curated pre-training business. So we use Quen to sort of filter out open web math and fine math. We see that that only saturates around 60%. But if you compare that to the data that was generated from Claude, that saturates around 80%. So there is something about the quality of data. But I think that the normative point still is that there exist these data properties that are independent of the data that matter, that make data high quality for online RL.